Going calls about the availability of Shedeur Sanders. The Browns, for whatever reason, don't think he's the guy. That's my opinion.
The Cleveland Browns front office does not want you thinking clearly about Shedeur Sanders right now. They want you distracted by the word competition. They want you nodding along to the phrase quarterback battle. And they absolutely do not want you asking the one question that blows the entire narrative apart. Why are multiple NFL teams already calling Cleveland about the availability of a rookie they just drafted? Welcome back. This is hot news, and today we are ripping the doors completely off the Cleveland Browns quarterback room and exposing the absolute undeniable power play that is being run against Shedeur Sanders before training camp even opens. Let me say that again so it lands properly. Multiple NFL teams calling Cleveland about Shedeur Sanders before a single preseason snap has been taken, before training camp on July 28th, before the Browns have played a single meaningful game with their 4-quarterback roster. The phones are ringing in Berea, Ohio, and the question being asked on the other end of the line is brutally simple: is Shedeur Sanders available? And the fact that those calls are being made tells you everything you need to know about what the rest of the league thinks about what the Browns are doing to this young man. Because here is what the establishment does not want you to look at. Here is the part of the story the press release completely skipped. The Cleveland Browns, for whatever reason, and I want you to sit with that phrase, for whatever reason, have already decided in the minds of multiple people inside that building that Shedeur Sanders is not their guy. That is not speculation. That is the direct assessment of insider reporting out of ESPN Cleveland. The Browns, for whatever reason, don't think he's the guy. That is the verdict being rendered on a rookie who hasn't even had his first training camp practice yet. That is the judgment being handed down on a player who, by all accounts, coming out of OTAs and mandatory minicamp, has been outperforming expectations and closing the gap on the competition. And the rest of the NFL has noticed, even if Cleveland refuses to. Now let's talk about who broke this story, because the source matters here. The report about teams calling about Shedeur Sanders' availability came from Rizzo, the ESPN Cleveland insider who has been tracking this quarterback situation from day one. And here is why Rizzo's name attached to this story is significant. The last time Rizzo broke a major quarterback trade story in Cleveland, the trade actually happened. That is his track record. That is the weight behind his reporting. When Rizzo says the calls are being made, you do not dismiss that. You do not wave it away. You take it seriously. Because the last time the market moved on a Browns quarterback and Rizzo was the first one to say so, the move went through. The establishment wants you to treat this as rumor. I am telling you this is signal. Let me walk you through the timeline of what has actually happened inside that Browns quarterback room this offseason, because the sequence of events is damning when you lay it out in order. When OTAs first opened, the very first day of organized team activities, Shedeur Sanders was not taking first-team reps. Let that sink in. The rookie quarterback who was brought in with enormous expectations, the player whose name was generating calls from around the league, was working with the second-team offense on day one of OTAs. Day one, while who was running with the first team? Deshaun Watson and Dillon Gabriel. Deshaun Watson and Dillon Gabriel were side by side with the first-team offense while Shedeur Sanders was getting second-team work. Those are the facts on the ground from the opening of the offseason program. Now I want you to understand what that decision communicates. When a franchise makes the deliberate choice to open its offseason program with its veteran starter and an undrafted rookie running first-team reps ahead of a highly drafted young quarterback, that is not a neutral procedural decision. That is a statement. That is the coaching staff and the front office telling everyone in that building, and everyone paying attention from the outside, exactly where the hierarchy stands. And they made that statement on the very first day. Before Shedeur Sanders had a single chance to prove himself at the NFL level, before he had thrown one pass in an NFL practice, the Browns showed their hand on day one, and the hand they showed was not a winning one for Shedeur. Here is where it gets even more complicated, and I need you to follow this thread carefully because it is the thread that unravels the entire Browns narrative. As OTAs progressed and mandatory minicamp arrived, Shedeur Sanders reportedly began to close the gap. The reporting coming out of Cleveland indicated that by the time minicamp was underway, Shedeur had moved himself into a position where the competition was genuinely tightening. He was getting more reps alongside Deshaun Watson. The gap that existed on day one of OTAs was no longer the same gap by the end of mandatory minicamp, and insiders noted that the momentum shift was real and it was visible. So here is the question you have to ask. Here is the question that the Cleveland Browns front office does not want you sitting with. If Shedeur Sanders was closing the gap during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, if he was genuinely competing and showing enough that the gap was tightening, then why are trade calls being made right now? Why is his availability being discussed? Why are teams around the league picking up the phone? Because those two things cannot coexist in a clean, honest narrative. Either the Browns genuinely believe in the competition and Shedeur is proving himself, in which case you do not shop him, or the Browns had already decided before OTAs opened, before the second-team rep assignment on day one, before Dillon Gabriel was running with the first unit, that Shedeur Sanders was not going to be their starting quarterback, and everything that came after was theater. And I am telling you, every single person watching this video, the evidence points to the second option. The Browns had a plan. The plan was not built around Shedeur Sanders, and now the rest of the league is figuring that out, and the phones are ringing. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson for a moment, because you cannot understand what is happening to Shedeur Sanders without understanding the absolute catastrophic dead weight that the Browns are carrying at the quarterback position. Deshaun Watson is the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, according to the team's official position. That is the stance coming out of Berea. Watson has the job. It is his to lose. The reporting out of Cleveland indicates that Watson has been given a window, roughly 6 weeks into the preseason, to demonstrate that he can perform at a level that justifies the Browns' commitment to him. If Watson does not perform, the reporting suggests Shedeur Sanders would step in and take over as the starter. Let me say that plainly. The Cleveland Browns are running a quarterback depth chart where their highest drafted rookie, a player that multiple NFL teams are now calling about, is sitting behind a quarterback who has been the subject of enormous controversy and whose ability to perform at an NFL level right now is genuinely in question. That is the situation. That is the reality. And the Browns have structured their entire offseason around protecting that arrangement, which is why Shedeur started on the second team on day one, which is why Dillon Gabriel was getting first-team reps, and which is why the trade calls are now happening. Because the rest of the league can see the dysfunction from the outside, even when Cleveland refuses to acknowledge it from the inside. Now let's talk about Dillon Gabriel, because his presence in this quarterback room is one of the most glaring, baffling details in this entire story. Dillon Gabriel, not Deshaun Watson, not Shedeur Sanders, was the player running side by side with Watson when OTAs opened. Dillon Gabriel was getting first-team reps at the start of the Browns' offseason program, and I want you to think about what that means for a moment. The Browns brought in 4 quarterbacks. They had Watson, they had Shedeur Sanders, they had Dillon Gabriel, and they had a 4th option. And on the first day of organized team activities, the arrangement they chose was Watson and Gabriel with the first team, Sanders with the second team. That is a deliberate, surgical decision. That is not random. That is the Browns telling you, through their practice structure, exactly what they think of Shedeur Sanders' place in their plans. And the insiders tracking this situation have pointed out something that is absolutely worth your attention. If the Browns were genuinely considering trading Shedeur Sanders, if those trade conversations were happening or being explored during the same window when they were also giving him significant reps, then the entire offseason rep distribution starts to look different. Because if you are planning to move a quarterback, you do not load him up with reps and then trade him. You give him enough work to maintain his value and his readiness, but the reps going to other players make more sense in the context of a potential trade. The fact that Dillon Gabriel was getting first-team work from day one, the fact that the Browns were running Watson and Gabriel together while Shedeur was on the second unit, all of that looks different if the Browns were already exploring the trade market. And now that the trade calls are confirmed to be happening, it looks even more deliberate in hindsight. This is the conversation that television refuses to have. This is the part of the story that the polite, deferential press coverage in Cleveland keeps dancing around. The Cleveland Browns may have drafted Shedeur Sanders with no genuine intention of building around him. They may have taken him in the draft, run him through an off-season program, structured his rep distribution in a way that protected their existing quarterback hierarchy, and simultaneously been exploring what the trade market looks like. And if that is what happened, if that is the reality behind the curtain, then what was done to Shedeur Sanders is one of the most ruthless, undeniable acts of organizational bad faith that we have seen from an NFL front office in recent memory. And here is the thing that nobody in the mainstream conversation is saying loudly enough. There is another dimension to this story that deserves its own paragraph, its own moment of serious consideration. What if Shedeur Sanders himself wants out of Cleveland? What if, after watching the way this offseason has been structured, after being assigned to the second team on day one, after watching Dillon Gabriel run with the first unit, after seeing the way the organization has handled the quarterback room, what if Shedeur has looked at this situation and concluded that Cleveland is not the place where he is going to get a fair opportunity? Because that is a completely rational conclusion for a young quarterback to reach. And if Shedeur's camp is communicating anything to the market, if there is any signal coming from his side that he would be open to a new situation, that would accelerate the trade calls dramatically. Teams do not just randomly call about a rookie quarterback in the middle of a quarterback battle. Somebody put Shedeur's name into the trade conversation. The question of who initiated that, whether it was Cleveland exploring the market or Shedeur's camp signaling availability, is the most important unanswered question in this entire situation. The insider reporting out of Cleveland describes the momentum around Shedeur's name in the trade market as something that built notably around the time of mandatory minicamp. The same window when Shedeur was reportedly closing the gap in the quarterback competition is the same window when his name started appearing in trade conversations. And the question being asked by people tracking this closely is whether the Browns were deliberately generating interest, putting Shedeur's name out there, letting the market know he might be available, to see what kind of return they could get. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is standard operating procedure for NFL front offices. You create interest, you gauge the market, you see what comes back. And right now, what is coming back from the rest of the NFL is a chorus of teams asking the same question: how much does it cost to get Shedeur Sanders out of Cleveland? Let me be entirely clear with you about what the training camp date of July 28th means in this context. The reporting is explicit that nothing is imminent, no trade has been agreed to, no deal is done, but the reporting is equally explicit that all 4 quarterbacks on the Browns' current roster are not expected to be there when training camp opens. Not all 4. The roster is going to change. And the question of which quarterback leaves, whether it is Shedeur Sanders being traded, whether it is another roster move, whether it is something else entirely, is going to be answered between now and the end of July. The window is short, the calls are being made, the market is active, and the Cleveland Browns are sitting at the center of one of the most chaotic, absolute quarterback situations in the entire NFL right now. I am going to put my name on this. I am going to go on record right now and tell you exactly what I believe is going to happen. I believe that Shedeur Sanders will not be on the Cleveland Browns roster when the regular season begins. I believe the trade calls that are happening right now are going to produce a deal. I believe that the Browns, having structured their entire offseason around protecting Deshaun Watson's starting position and having given Shedeur a rep distribution that was never genuinely designed to develop him as their starter, are going to move him to a team that actually wants him. And I believe that when that trade happens, the team that gets Shedeur Sanders is going to look like the smartest franchise in the NFL within 2 years. If I am wrong, come back here and say so. I want the receipt, but I am not wrong. The pattern is too clean. The evidence is too clear. The Browns front office has been running a baffling, undeniable operation against their own rookie quarterback since the first day of OTAs, and the rest of the league has already figured out what Cleveland refuses to admit. Shedeur Sanders is not the problem in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders is the solution that Cleveland is trying to give away. He came into OTAs and closed the gap on a veteran quarterback. He performed well enough through mandatory minicamp that his momentum was impossible to ignore. He did everything a rookie can do in the offseason to prove his value, and the response from the Browns front office was to have their insider contacts confirm that the trade calls are coming in and that it might be in the best interest of both parties for him to move on. Both parties. That is the language being used. Both parties. As if Shedeur Sanders is the one who created this situation. As if the organization that assigned him to the second team on day one, that ran Dillon Gabriel with the first unit, that has been publicly committed to Deshaun Watson as the starter, bears no responsibility for the absolute mess that the Cleveland Browns quarterback room has become. Every fan who watched Shedeur Sanders at Colorado, every single person who saw what he could do with the football in his hands, deserves better than this. And more importantly, Shedeur Sanders deserves better than this. He deserves to be on a roster where the front office is genuinely committed to his development, where the rep distribution reflects a real belief in his future, where the coaching staff is not running a 4-quarterback circus while simultaneously fielding trade calls from around the league. He deserves a real opportunity, and the brutal, unavoidable truth is that Cleveland was never going to give him one. Drop your most honest take in the comments right now. Is the Cleveland Browns front office deliberately sabotaging Shedeur Sanders' development to protect Deshaun Watson's starting job, or is there a legitimate football reason why a rookie who has been outperforming expectations is already being shopped to the rest of the league? I want every opinion, Pick a side and commit to it. The conversation is happening whether Cleveland wants it to or not. Hit the notification bell because this trade situation is moving fast, and when the deal drops, we are going to be the first ones breaking it down in full. We will see you in the next video.
I don't. Nothing is imminent, but the calls are being made. And I think it's probably in the best interest of both parties here. Going calls about the availability of Shedeur Sanders. The Browns, for whatever reason, don't think he's the guy. That's my opinion. I don't. Nothing is imminent, but the calls are being made. And I think it's probably in the best interest of both parties here.